Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Hello from wherever everyone is joining us. Welcome to what is now our 35th episode of the UNA Poland speaker series, online in Corona times, as is everything. Today we're very happy, we're very honored to have with us Minister Joyce Murray, who's a member of the Canadian Parliament, but perhaps more importantly for today's discussion, she's the Minister of Digital Government in Canada. And Minister, allow me to jump right into it. And I'd like to begin by coming back to a recent ranking that was published by IMD, the World Digital Competitiveness Ranking, in which Canada actually ranked in the top 15 in the world, leaving behind China, Australia, Germany, and many, many other countries. And the first question that pops up to my head with regards to this is, what is the recipe for success of a digital government, of a digital country? What sort of aspects make up for a successful digital government?
Well, thanks for that question, Adam, and I'm delighted to have been invited to speak with your members. And as I was saying earlier, the UNA is a very important organization, and I know it well. So what makes for a successful digital country? I mean, firstly, that needs to be a priority because it requires investment by the government. It's a work in progress in Canada, so we can't claim to be where we want to be. And I think it's, for any country, it's a voyage, and it has to be seen that way. When I was appointed, I thought about the fact that I was assigned a department that had components in separate or three separate places, really. One is about the policy and directives and governance, and so that's the Chief Information Officer branch of the Government of Canada, very separate from another aspect of my portfolio, which is Shared Services Canada, and that is a group of 7,500 public servants that manage the underpinnings of information technology for all of the public servants in Canada. Very different group of people, different mandate. And the third one is the digital open source coders that know how to do things in modern digital world, focused on principles like user-centric, iterating, working in the open, those kinds of things. So I think success, we're more successful because we brought all of those three components that are so different, and we're in different parts of our government bureaucracy together under digital government, because we need to have the policy and leadership and guidance, but we also need to have those who are actually doing the work of moving applications into the cloud and the coders that come up with new solutions. So that was a start. And the second thing I would like to mention is that I worked to create a strategy for this. So I had to pulling these three components of the department together, and then what is the key focus? Because there is so much when it comes to information technology. You can just get buried in so much detail and so many. Oh, it's very difficult. So the strategy, I determined that there would be 4 pillars to my strategy. One pillar was that in updating old, outdated, monolithic applications, and I'm sure Poland has some of those too. Canada certainly does. The ones that are vulnerable, that break down, that are critical to people receiving benefits and services. So pillar 1 is we are going to replace these in a way that does not create the future's old, monolithic, outdated applications. In other words, we're going to do it differently in a digital modern way, piece by piece, iterating, short sprints, trying things out, working with users. So we're changing how we update old stuff. 2 is we need to have a platform approach, whereas before each ministry had their own authorities and their own legislation, and they owned their own data and they did not share it. moving to a platform approach bit by bit. That's core. The third pillar is that we are going to be developing digital tools so that we can actually meet our goal of delivering secure, easy to use, fast, effective services accessible from any device a person chooses. So that is a third element. And the last element is that we are addressing the institutional barriers to change, because our public service is not as long-standing as Poland's, but over 150 years of having a very siloed structure of accountability and responsibility within ministries, and little appetite or ability to work across ministries. So that cultural and institutional barriers to change, we need to address that head on and bring people on board with those kind of changes. So that's my approach to advancing digital in Canada.
I'm very glad you mentioned indeed the fact that, you know, in order to be successful, you need to have priorities as one of the pillars as well, so to speak. And the second thing that you mentioned at the beginning was bringing these different aspects together and thereby creating this atmosphere of also network governance, of governing these 3 or 4 different elements. I think that's very important, especially, you know, today when digitization, technology, ICT, since March, since April, they have become a crucial aspect of, I think, all of our lives. I know that you're also very much passionate about sustainability, the environment, and that's sort of where I want to direct our discussion now, and ask you about the link between technological advancement, between digitization, and indeed ensuring that we develop in a sustainable way, that economic growth is coupled with concern for the environment. What is your take on that? What is the role of technology here?
Well, that's a really great question. And I see these two aspects as being very, very linked, that it's important to define how we are going to have our digital strategy also support our climate and environmental strategies. It will happen to some degree by itself, but it will be far more effective if we are explicitly focusing on those links. And so, I mean, one way I think we can all see that it happened by itself is when the pandemic hit, we went from having perhaps 40,000 public servants that were using remote technologies and working from home. And now we have up to 280,000 connections that can be made securely, collaborating, working from home with good security and the tools that people need. That happened almost overnight, and it was my ministry people really rose to the challenge and accelerated the plans for those kinds of transition and condensed it into just a few weeks. And so that took a lot of cars off the road. So there was a lot less commuting. There was a lot less driving. So some of it happened by itself. And as we move past the pandemic, I think it's clear that there will be more telecommuting. There will be more work from home, remote work than there was before, and that will be permanent. But the things that we're really encouraging here in Canada, one is we have a framework that is a greening government strategy, and I had the privilege of being the architect of that framework in 2016 when I was in a different job. And that framework set targets for our public service activities and how we would go about reducing our emissions to meet the targets of 40% reduction by 2030 and now net zero by 2050. And so I laid out a framework that had 6 parts. and government operations, employee commuting, fleet, buildings, waste management, and green procurement. And so this has been in place in Canada through the Centre for Greening Government since 2016. But greening procurement is now, we've picked that up in our digital government ministry. And because I think some $7 billion a year is spent on IT goods and services in the government of Canada each and every year. And so we're applying this greening procurement approach, not just what we buy, not just the IT operations themselves, but when we're looking to have a supplier bid, we will be reviewing their sustainability practices. So I call that upstream greening. So the supply chain upstream, what we do, and downstream, the impact it has. We're looking at all of those segments, and that will make sure that our suppliers are doing their work, and then the supply chains they use will also become more climate literate and more focused. So that's one way. And I can tell you, Adam, it's been very satisfying to see that because of this government leadership in our own operations from 4 years ago, we are now leading the charge in the digital nations, which is 10 countries that work together that are supporting each other in digital transformation. And we introduced the environmental sustainability component to the D10, and we'll be leading that initiative amongst the 10 digital nations over the coming year. And so that way it radiates out. That's just one point. And then of course, moving to cloud storage is much more energy efficient. And there's other ways that we're working on this as well, but I'll leave it at that. Give you some time for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it shows the connection there very, very well. And this idea of indeed green procurement, in my view, it aligns very well with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly the one that relates to sustainable consumption and production. Like what you mentioned about encouraging suppliers to also produce in a more sustainable, in a more green way. So I will be very interested to see how that progresses on in the years to come, because I think this is an example that other countries can indeed learn from and indeed look at as a prime example that can be followed. And in fact, this is something similar to what the Minister of Climate Action and Innovation of Austria mentioned in a discussion we held a couple of days ago with her. And I'm very happy to see that some ideas are echoed. And that so there is this network of these ideas being created. I think that is really, really important, because as we know, and I'm sure you'll agree, I hope you'll agree, that in order to achieve the 17 goals, we need to look at it holistically. So we cannot just separate them and act upon them individually.
Yes, I totally agree.
Great to hear. So the agenda, moving smoothly, the agenda was well designed and adopted particularly to alleviate socioeconomic inequalities. And there's much the discussion about the relationship between technological advancement and socioeconomic inequality has risen again. And we've seen reports a couple of years ago saying that 44% of jobs in the US within 20 years will be replaced. People will be replaced by computers. Similarly, 66%, I think this was a report in 2016 by Frey and others, 66% of jobs in developing countries are at risk. So this is indeed an issue that is very much alive, I think, today. And what can we do in order to ensure that the development we make in technology, in artificial intelligence and digitization doesn't deepen the socioeconomic inequalities, but on the other hand, actually works to alleviate them?
Well, that's a really great question also. And in Canada, we're a liberal government that is very focused on the middle class, those seeking to join it, and focusing on inclusion and equality. It's a big part of our of everything that we think about. And so one of the things our Prime Minister did is we have explicitly a minister for inclusion. So whether it's
One of the few countries in the world, actually.
yeah, and we have a minister, a different minister who's looking at women's equality, and that's in the title of her ministry. And we have a minister responsible for accessibility for the disabled, and that's in her title as a minister as well. And so that means that we have three people that always have the lens on what are we doing to help equality and inclusiveness through the work that we're doing, whether it's economic or health or anything else. So that's a foundation that causes all of the ministers to take this as our responsibility, and I take it very personally as my responsibility as well. So Adam, I can't predict the kinds of dislocations that will happen 20 years from now or 10 years from now from IT and the advancement of IT, but we know that people are resilient and they find ways to contribute and make a difference. And so our government is helping the transition, just as we're helping in the transition to a clean economy. And we've made massive investments to provide alternative work for people who were working in the oil and gas industry in Alberta, for example. We put a huge amount of money to assist in the closing and revegetation of abandoned oil wells sites, which is thousands across the landscape. So we'll be there to help people. But as the Minister of Digital Government, there's a few very specific things. I have asked our Shared Services Canada, which is that major group that does so much procurement, I have challenged them to think about inclusion and equality in procurement, because they've had a bit of a reputation as really prioritizing major, big, and sometimes international suppliers. If it's a really big contract, it can be very difficult for a small business, for example, to apply. Never mind a small business headed up by a woman entrepreneur or a Black entrepreneur or somebody from the disabled community. So I've asked them to think about how they can shift that. We have some new initiatives. One, we're working with small business suppliers to create a digital marketplace that is really modeled on the UK's digital marketplace, bringing in more ability for small businesses to get some of that work. We also are working with a council that is represented by associations who work with different businesses, and that's the Association of Black Entrepreneurs, the Association of Women Entrepreneurs, and so on. And we are consulting with them and working with them. So we open out our procurement opportunities to create work for people that may have a harder time being included. And then lastly, I want to mention that we have a group right within the major Shared Services Canada that supports all of the ministries and their information, their ITC work, that is called the Accessibility, Accommodation and Adaptive Computer Technology Group, AACT group. And their job is explicitly to make sure that public servants are hired who belong to disabled groups because they have so much talent and capability and simply need potentially some help with the tools that they use. It's to provide to invent or create or procure and provide tools to our public servants, and to be the voice for how, when we are thinking about ICT, we are considering accessibility by design right at the front end of everything we do. So those are some measures. I mean, we don't have as many women in leadership positions in in technology as I would like. And so I personally am championing that we seek ways and find ways to elevate and advance women in tech so that we can have 50% women leaders in IT. We've got a ways to go.
Yeah, I think well, that's one of the things that, well, I guess lots of countries around the world are indeed struggling with, not just in the tech sector, but in others as well. And we've seen in Germany the recent announcement that boards have to be made up of 50% of women. So there is legislation in countries looking at those issues. But I guess Canada must be doing something right, in the sense that in quality of life indicators, Canada, you always see it, you know, among the top 3, next to Australia, next to Scandinavian nations as well. So I guess something is being done right as well. And as you mentioned, you have the 4 ministers with very specific, very unique portfolios, I would say, because I would find it difficult. I would find it difficult to find a mirror-like ministry in other places around the world. I am looking at the clock, and I don't want to take too much more of your time, so I will move on to my last question. And very much with an outlook for the future, really. So schools have now gone 100% digital in Poland and in many other countries as well. Like you mentioned, businesses, the world of work has transformed dramatically online. Where and if, well, first of all, is there an endpoint to technological advancement in the broader sense? And if so, where is it? Where do we put the full stop? Do we stop at autonomous cars? Do we stop at robots taking on the roles of teachers? Where are we going with this?
There's no stop.
I was afraid you'd say that.
Yeah, human beings evolved by exploring, experimenting, adventuring, trying new things, and that's why our species has been successful, really. So we have to make sure that what we're doing on the IT level, whether it's quantum computing or IT or AI, artificial intelligence, that we have as a government, that we have clear policies to ensure responsible use of technology. And that is something my ministry is responsible is a directive on responsible use of AI by the public service. I mean, it can be worrisome when you think about quantum computing and just how incredibly it can change everything. And how does that impact cybersecurity, for example, if you can have 1,000 times as many, attempts to break through a cybersecurity firewall as before, or much more than that even. Are we vulnerable to not being able to secure our networks and have them have the breaches that can be very damaging to the privacy of our citizens? Excuse me, I'll just take a sip of water.
Of course.
But even as the private sector and really the dark web, I suppose, is moving forward on these things, so is the public sector. We have some very smart people working with us in government and in our cybersecurity Center for Cybersecurity, of which my ministry is a key partner. And so we are already looking at ways that we would be able to change our security perimeter to address the changes that quantum computing may bring in the future. So we just have to be very mindful of protection of privacy, citizen trust in their government. That is absolutely fundamental to being able to serve citizens, is that they trust us. And so we need to be continuously moving forward on those fronts, because innovation is not going to stop. And we're still a long way, Adam, from being where I would like to be, which is where every Canadian can access any piece of information, transaction, or service from the government of Canada, sitting on their couch with their smartphone, as easily as ordering from Amazon, and then getting a text as where their application, where's their transaction in real time, and when will it be on their doorstep, in other words, completed. That's not how we work now. And we've got, over 300 members of parliament that sometimes feel that their offices and their office staff are doing the work of the government because people no longer want to wait for months for a government transaction to be completed. They don't want to download forms and fill them out with a pen and fax them in and then find out 6 months later where their application is at.
I know the feeling, because here at the UNA we have to deal with tens of forms on a daily, monthly basis, and that all has to be sent. We have no clue where it is, and so on and so forth. So I'm absolutely with you on that one.
So we're not there yet. That's my vision, is no more paper forms or faxes, no more confusing and hard to find government benefits and services. You go to a portal and there's your set that you can apply for. No more phoning and sitting on hold and on a call center. The call gets dropped to find out where your application is for a visa or family visits. No more complicated logins with easy to forget credentials. Every government service, you've got a different login, and no more filing your own taxes. If it's a simple tax form, government can do it for us because the revenue agency already has that information. So that's a set of changes specific to serving Canadians better, that is part of what they will be receiving in the future. And then who knows how we can keep improving from there. I would never want to say that this job is done. As long as we can do a better job in establishing trust, responsibility, and great service, we'll keep working on it.
Well, I keep my fingers crossed for your plans to materialize in the future. But from the sound of it, I'm sure you are on the right track, on the right way to achieving them. Minister, thank you very much. It was a wonderful pleasure, great honor to have been able to conduct this short discussion with you on really important, really crucial topics, particularly today, I think, in the time of COVID-19, where everybody's at home, everybody's on their computer, everybody is using technology, everybody is in the digital environment. So once again, on behalf of the entire team here at UNA Poland, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for what you're doing to convene these discussions, Adam. I was delighted to be part of it. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.